So in today's screencast, we're going to be looking at loops in microbit. So when we're talking about loops, we're talking about code that repeats. So if you're doing something over and over and over again, then you really should be thinking about using a loop instead of just repeating your code over and over again. Now, there are a number of different types of loops. So there are 4 specific ones in microbit. There are other ones in other languages, but for the purposes of this screencast, I'm just going to look at the 4 that are available in microbit. So we have a forever loop, we have a repeat loop, we have a while loop, and we have a for loop. And each of them repeats code. It's just how they do it is slightly different, and how they end and what the conditions are for them to continue differs across all 4 of them. So if we look at the forever loop, here we're repeating the code enclosed in the loop forever. So as the name suggests, it just keeps on going. So this is one that you would, maybe if you were checking if the score in a game is above a certain value. So for example, if you get to a score of 20, you want to finish your game. Or if you have a number of lives and you have 5 lives, and when the lives gets to 0, you want to end your game, then that is something that you might enclose in a forever loop, because it will keep on going until you get to lives of 0. And once the lives gets to 0, then the whole game will stop. So that's something that you might use in a forever loop. So you need to be careful with the forever loop, because as the name suggests, it does keep going all the time. So we're going to look at a project to illustrate this forever block. So what we're going to do is we're just going to keep showing a happy face, then we'll do a pause, and then we'll do a sad face, and then we'll do a pause. So it's just going to keep flicking backwards and forwards between a happy and a sad face. So we're just going to create a new project here, and we're going to call it alternating emojis in a minute. So I'm just going to get rid of the on start block, because we're not going to use it in this particular case, but this time we are actually going to use the forever. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go into basic here, and I'm going to use the show icon, but you can use the show LEDs. So remember, you can just pull across the show LEDs and then just draw your happy face. But I'm just going to use the show icon because it has a happy face here. So I'm just going to pull that in there. So that's showing my happy face. And then remember, I want to do a little bit of a pause. So I'm going to pause for 100 milliseconds. And that's just to let me see the difference between the two. I'm then going to just go into show icon again. And I'm going to show a sad face, and I'm just going to do a little pause again, just so that we can see the difference between them. So now you'll see here it's simulating on the left hand side. So we'll see it's going happy face, sad face, happy face, sad face, and that will just keep on going. So there's nothing in there to stop it. So that's your most basic repeat loop. So it's literally just over and over and over again, just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So that's just your forever. Now, as I said, you can use this in a game maybe to check to see if you still have lives left or if you still have time left. So maybe you have a game that's time-based and you might say you have 60 seconds to do something. You could set a timer and then have a variable called timer, and then you count that down, and when it gets to 0 then you have no time left, or you can count it up and when it gets to 60 then you have no time left. So again, that's something that you might put into a forever. Now again, here just a reminder of how to save your project. So if we just call it alternating emojis, and again remember to give it names that it just means something, so when you come back to it it'll mean something. And then if I save it, it's going to download it to my downloads folder, and then I can copy that across onto the microbit and test it on the microbit. But generally we would just test it on the simulator first to make sure that it's working. Now, just one thing to be aware of here: if you're putting this onto the microbit and you leave the battery plugged in, because it's going to do something forever and it's constantly doing it, this will just drain the battery on the microbit. So just be careful if your students are using forever blocks, and if they're leaving the battery plugged in, then it will just drain the battery. So that's just something to be aware of. So that's the very basic, I suppose the most straightforward of the loops. We'll now have a look at some of the other loops. So the next loop we're going to look at is the repeat loop, and this repeats a certain number of times. So you know going into it that it's going to repeat 5 times, or it's going to repeat 10 times, or it's going to repeat 2 times. So an example of this might be to display a counter 5 times, decreasing the value each time. So for example, you might say counter is 5, and then you show the 5, and then you decrease it by 1 to make it 4, and then you show the 4, and then you decrease it by 1 again to show, and you show 3. decrease it by 1 again to show 2, and then finally decrease it by 1 again to show 1, and then you get to that's the end of your loop. And you can specify that it does it only 5 times. So our project to illustrate the repeat loop is exactly that. So when the A button is pressed, we're going to create a counter variable. We're going to set that counter variable to 5, and then we're going to repeat 6 times, show that number, and then change the counter by -1. So let's have a look at how we might do that. So we're going to create a new project, and then we're just going to delete our onStart and the forever blocks because we're not using them this time. We're going to go into input and pull across on button A pressed. And now we need to create a variable. So I'm going to make a variable and call it count. And the first thing I'm going to do is set the count to 5 here. And then we're going to go and find our repeat block. Now our repeat block is in the loops. So forever is in basic, but all of the other loops are in the loops block. So here we're going to pull across the repeat because we want to repeat this 6 times. And now we're going to look at what are we doing within this loop. So the repeat block itself determines how many times it's doing it. So other than putting in the 6 here, that's all we need to do to say it's doing it 6 times. So we don't need any indices or anything like that. It deals with all of that. So what we do need to decide now is what are we doing within our loop? Well, we're only doing 2 things here. We're showing a number, and then we're going to reduce that number. We're going to reduce the number count by -1. So if I go back to basic here, I pull across show number, and then I go to variables and I pull across count, and I just drop that in the 0. So now we're going to change the value of that variable by -1. So we're going to make that -1. So now it should print 5, then reduce it, print 4, reduce it, print 3, and so on. So let's test it. So when I press, I'm just going to restart. Press 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's going to show 0 because we're doing it 6 times. If I change it to 5 and just press my A button again, so we get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and this time it doesn't show the 0 because it's only doing it 5 times. But I'm just going to leave it back at the 6 because that's what we had said we would do. So I'm just going to call this repeat, and then I'm just going to go count decrease. And just save that. And again, now that I've tested it, I can put it onto the microbit and I can test it on the microbit. So that's the repeat. So again, you can see, you tell it how many times it's going to do it, and then you decide what you're going to do within the loop. So the next loop we're going to look at is the while loop. So in this case, we repeat the code enclosed in the loop as long as the condition is true. So we have a condition that we must test at the start. If that condition is true, we go into the loop. But as it says here, if the condition is false at the start, then the code in the loop is never run. So you just need to be a little bit careful how you construct your conditions when you're using while loops, because if you wanted to run at least once, then you need to make sure that your condition will allow you to go in, and then you can change something in there and then decide from there. So an example is to repeat a loop as long as the user enters input. So you ask the user if they want to continue entering input. If they do, then you go into the loop. If they don't, then you come out of the loop. So we'll create this project. So the example we're going to look at here is creating a new project. At the start, we're going to create a variable called pressed and set it to false. And then while pressed is false, we're going to show press A and pause. And then it's going to keep doing that while A is not pressed. When we press the button A down here, we'll see that it sets pressed to true. That will cause it to fall out of this loop, and after the loop we're going to show a string by. So let's just have a look at how we might do that. So we're going to create a new project. We're going to take out the forever block because we don't want it. At the start, we're going to create a variable called pressed. And we're going to set that to false. So here we're going to set pressed to. And then I'm just going to go into logic here. And I'm just going to set pressed to false. So this is what might be called a Boolean variable. So remember, a Boolean variable, when we looked at variables, a Boolean variable is something that is either true or false. So we're setting pressed to false to start off with. Then we're going to go into logic and we're going to, sorry, loops is where we're going to go, and we're going to pull the while block in here. So we need to go into logic now, and we're going to construct our condition. So I'm just going to drop our condition in here. So we're going to check for equality of something here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into variables, and we're saying while pressed is false. So we're going to go back into logic to get our false. So while pressed is false, we're going to show a string to say press A. So this is going to say press A. So while that Boolean variable is set to false, it's just going to keep saying press A. So now we're going to put in a little pause. So we're going to pause for 150 milliseconds in between each time it says that. So I'm just going to make that 150. So you'll see it just keeps saying press A. And now it's pausing, and then it says press A again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to on button A pressed. And when the A button is pressed, I'm going to go to variables. I'm going to set pressed to true. So here, if I go to logic and find the true, I'm just going to, so when we press the A button, then it's saying I've pressed the button A, so then it's going to fall out of that loop. So it's restarted again. So every time we change something, it restarts. So it's restarted again. It's saying press A. And then I press the A button, and now it's stopped, as it should do. So let's just restart it again. It's saying press A. And then it's going to say it again. Now if I press the A button, you'll see that there's a little bit of a delay between me pressing it and it stopping, but that's just because it needs to keep showing that string because it's in the middle of doing it. The last thing we need to do here is just show a string by at the very end, because now the loop is finished. So I'm just going to pull this over so you can see it. So let's just restart again. So it's saying press A. I'm going to press A. And now it says bye. So it's fallen out of that loop. So it keeps doing the loop as long as the condition is true. And in this case, the condition being true is that pressed is equal to false. So that's the while loop. So our final loop is the for loop. And this one uses an index. So we say for index 0 to n, we repeat the code enclosed in the loop n plus 1 times. So it's similar to the repeat loop, except you have a little bit more control over it. And an example of this might be the countdown timer that maybe you did in first week, where remember I said to you not to use loops. This is one where you could actually, this is a typical example of where you might use a loop. So let's look at the project that we're going to do here. So if we're creating a new project, and when the A button is pressed, we're going to display the numbers from 3 to 8. So we're creating a new project here, and we'll get rid of the on start and the forever. When the A button is pressed, we go to loops, and you see we've got the for here. So here we can say for index 0 to, so in this case we're going to set index from 0 to 5. And we are going to have a variable called count. And at the start, we're going to set count to 3. And then we are going to show the number count within the loop. So if we put count in there, and then we're going to add 1 to count each time. So change count by 1. So now if we press the A button, we should see that we get so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, exactly as we're expecting to have. So this one, again, it's quite similar to the repeat loop, but in this case we have an index here, and maybe we can use that index for different things as well. Now we could have just used the index and added 3 onto the index here instead of using a separate count variable. So that, hopefully, in that screencast today, you have seen all the various different types of loops. I'll also do an extra one with some additional loops projects.